Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Black History Series presentation, Windsor's Black Mecca, Recovering the Stories of McDougall Street Corridor. Our guest speaker is Willow Key. Willow is a second-year graduate student in the Department of History at the University of Windsor. Her research explores the impact of post-war urban redevelopment in Windsor's historic Black community, the McDougall Street Corridor. Willow is currently serving as the lead researcher for the We Were Here Recovering the Stories of the McDougall Street Corridor project as part of the University of Windsor's Anti-Black Racism Student Leadership Experience Grant in partnership with the Essex County Black Historical Research Society, Center for Cities and Parallel 42. Willow is also a member of the Essex County Black Historical Research Society and the Our Day Study Club. So we're very excited to hear Willow present today, and we hope that you enjoy. While Willow is presenting, if everyone could please mute their microphone and turn off their camera while she's presenting, that would really be appreciated. Following her presentation, there will be a Q&A period, so just type in your questions and comment in the comment section, or you can raise your hand as well, and I'll call on you. So during that point, you're welcome to turn your camera back on as well. So thank you so much, Willow, and I'll pass it over to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, hi everyone. Just going to set up the PowerPoint here. Hopefully everyone can see. So hi, thank you so much to the Amherstburg Freedom Museum for hosting this event and allowing me to share my research with everyone. I'll be sharing my current research regarding Windsor's Black history, specifically the history of the McDougall Street Corridor, a predominantly Black neighborhood that was deeply affected by post-war urban renewal. So I'm going to start off by providing a brief history of the McDougall Street corridor. Then I'll explore the various elements that made the corridor a distinct and vibrant Black community. I'll end the presentation by discussing Canada's urban redevelopment history and the impact of this post-war policy on Windsor's Black population. The McDougall Street corridor, which was previously referred to as South Detroit, is demarcated roughly by Riverside Drive, Glengarry Avenue, Erie Street East, and Goyou Street. And this is where the majority of the community was concentrated, though there were members of the Black community that lived slightly outside of this area. The McDougall Street corridor's Black settlement emerged in the early to mid 19th century when enslaved African Americans and free people of color traveled to Canada from the United States via the Underground Railroad in search of freedom and better opportunities. At first, the number of people coming across the border was relatively small, but following the establishment of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, there was a surge of freedom seekers traveling to Canada, and some historians suggest upwards of 10,000 people crossed the border during this period, with many crossing at the Detroit River. When these men and women crossed the border into Windsor, many received medical care and temporary housing at Windsor's former army barracks, which is just this photo right here. Located roughly where City Hall is today. Some men and women chose to stay in the area to wait for loved ones or to be close to Detroit where they may have had family. The border also provided many work opportunities, and these factors led to the settlement of what would become the McDougall Street corridor. The community evolved over the next century, with residents establishing schools, businesses, and social clubs. The community was extremely close-knit. Many families in the area were related or connected through marriage. And so the McDougall Street corridor truly functioned as a landscape of extended family, making this portion of Windsor a safe place within a city that was not always accommodating or kind to those of African descent. You may be wondering at this point why this particular area was so heavily populated with Black Canadians. It's important to mention that Windsor had housing segregation until about the mid-1960s, especially in the form of racially restrictive covenants. This resulted in there being very few neighborhoods across Windsor that allowed Black residents to purchase or rent homes. And these discriminatory housing policies forced Black families into the corridor and often restricted their movement into other areas. So, defining Black Canadian spaces. Within the study of Canadian history, identifying Black spaces has not always been seen as a critical element of understanding the Black experience in Canada. The importance and influence of community has often been ignored in discussions related to Black Canadian history and the positioning of Blackness within the Canadian landscape. I'm going to talk to you about the various elements that were present specifically in the McDougall Street corridor to sort of demonstrate the organization, political fortitude, and social contributions of this overlooked community. The first element that defines Black settlement is the presence and the power of the Black church. For communities across North America, Black churches have long been a stabilizing force. This was certainly the case for the residents of the McDougall Street corridor. There are 5 distinct churches within the corridor: Tanner African Methodist Episcopal Church, the British Methodist Episcopal Church, First Baptist Church, Mount Zion Church of God in Christ, and Harrison Memorial. And there were a few smaller worship services as well around the area throughout the century of the community's height. But these were sort of the main staples for Black residents. So beginning with Tanner AME, this church was established in Canada as a product of the Underground Railroad. AME churches in the United States, which had been operating since the 18th century, provided networks of refuge and aid, bringing freedom seekers, abolitionists, and the AME denomination to Canada. Tanner AME was originally located at 408 Mercer Street, which is where these images here were taken. Emerging from the AME Church in the 1850s was the British Methodist Episcopal, or BME Church, which is a uniquely Canadian denomination of Black worship. Windsor's BME congregation was first established in 1852 with a small wood frame church built at the corner of McDougall Street and University Avenue East in the mid-1850s. By the 1860s, the congregation was in the process of building a brick church at 363 McDougall Street. Using water from the Detroit River for the mixing of the mortar, the church would eventually hold its first worship service in 1868. In 1853, Windsor's First Baptist Church was founded by Reverend William Troy, initially through small prayer meetings in homes around the McDougall Street corridor. Utilizing funds that Reverend Troy had collected on a grant-seeking mission to England, his congregation of freedom seekers and self-emancipated slaves would later build their own church by hand. In 1858, the cornerstone of First Baptist Church was laid on McDougall Street near University Avenue, becoming the second oldest First Baptist church in the city. By 1915, the congregation had grown substantially, and so they built a new church at 710 Mercer, which is where this photo is taken, and this one as well. In 1935, Bishop Clarence Leslie Morton Sr., also known as Elder Morton by his community, founded the Canadian and International Churches of God in Christ, one of the oldest Pentecostal denominations in Canada. Originally holding church services at a small rented hall on Tuscarora and then on the second floor of a McDougall Street machine shop, Bishop Morton and his congregation raised funds to build Mount Zion Church of God in Christ at the corner of McDougall and Elliott Street in 1939. The Morton family would amass a total of 5 Canadian and 6 American Pentecostal churches by the 1960s. Finally, Arthur T. Harrison, a student of Morton Sr., established Harrison Memorial, which was originally known as the Ontario Church of God in Christ, in 1963, initially holding church services in his own home. He would later move his congregation to the North American Masonic Lodge building on Mercer. In 1967, the congregation raised funds and built their own church at 810 Mercer Street, and that church is now called New Life. So over the years, these churches were instrumental in facilitating numerous community organizations and social outreach programs aimed at addressing the needs of the corridor's Black residents. All 5 churches supported local civil rights organizations beginning in the 1920s and maintained an essential role within this community. And a number of these churches were also heavily connected with Black churches in Michigan and in other parts of the United States. And it kept both Black communities on either side of the border relatively close and working together. Education has always been held in high regard by the residents of the McDougall Street corridor. Since its founding, the Black community in Windsor has established multiple schools and institutions to facilitate the education of both children and adults. However, schools in Ontario had long been racially segregated, and this practice was legalized through the Separate Schools Clause, an amendment of the Common Schools Act of 1850. The clause supported legal segregation on the basis of race and religion, allowing school boards to deny entry to Black students. While some residents of the McDougall Street corridor fought against these discriminatory laws, such as Alderman James L. Dunn, others created their own schools, often with limited funding and resources. Established in 1891, Mercer Street School was initially a Black school located at 815 Mercer Street. It would later become one of the first legally integrated schools in the city. However, outcry from white parents resulted in Mercer Street School maintaining a predominantly Black, Jewish, and immigrant population for much of its existence. For Black educators, the school on Mercer Street also provided an opportunity for secure employment. Other prominent schools that accepted students from the corridor included the Prince Edward School, J.C. Patterson Collegiate, and W.D. Lowe Technical School. The corridor's Black business district emerged quickly after the settling of the area. Grocery stores, confectionery stores, tailors, hairdressers, doctors, and carpenters were among the many Black men and women who established their businesses within the heart of Windsor's downtown Black Mecca. One such business, the Walker House Hotel, was established in 1883 as one of Ontario's premier Black-owned hotels. Built at the corner of McDougall Street and University Avenue, the hotel was owned and operated by the Smith family for more than 70 years. Hotels like the Walker House were essential for Black travelers during the 19th and 20th centuries, as it was often very difficult to find clean and hospitable accommodations that would accept African Canadian patrons. The hotel offered comfortable lodgings, warm meals in the dining area, and entertainment such as checkers, cards, or live music in the beverage room and bar. Sorry, hold on. Apologies. Where was I? Warm meals in the dining room and entertainment such as checkers, cards, or live music in the beverage room and bar. For Black Canadians and Americans alike, the Walker House Hotel allowed them to travel with dignity and freedom. More than just a hotel, the Walker House also served the Black community as a meeting space for social organizations and political rallies. Another essential business within the corridor was the Fellowship of Colored Churches Credit Union. Established in 1944, the organization was dedicated to creating and preserving Black wealth in the corridor. Initial meetings for the credit union were held at 480 Broadhead Street, the home of civil rights activist Hugh Burnett, who also served on the credit union committee for a number of years. Credit unions were valuable institutions during the 20th century, as it was incredibly difficult for many Black people to secure mortgages or other loans from banks due to negative perceptions. Black credit unions ensured that families could purchase homes, establish businesses, or secure personal loans. The credit union also established a student aid bursary, which provided Black students with funding to pursue post-secondary education. Entertainment was provided by a number of social halls, including Landrum Hall and the Frontier Social Club. In the late 1920s, John Landrum purchased a plot of land at 452 and 454 McDougall Street and obtained a permit to build a two-story, five-room public hall. Initially, the hall served as the meeting place for Windsor's Black Masons. Later, other organizations frequently rented the hall for various occasions. Municipal candidates often held rallies and public discussions at Landrum Hall due to the political strength within the McDougall Street corridor in the 1920s and 1930s. The hall was later purchased in the 1930s by Clarence Monroe, who operated the Frontier Social Club. The club served as one of Windsor's most popular Black locations, not only for music and dancing, but for community fundraisers and political events. The Windsor City Directory of 1934 advertised the Frontier Social Club as Windsor's Little Harlem and the place for entertainment in the border cities. Black social clubs were also present throughout the corridor. Organizations like the Independent Order of Odd Fellows and the Black Masons, specifically the North American Masonic Lodge No. 11 and the North Star Masonic Lodge No. 7, had strong membership throughout Windsor and Essex County. Women's groups like the Order of the Eastern Star and House of Ruth were also quite popular. Social clubs often evolved from the need to address issues within the Black community or to address the difficulties in accessibility for homes or jobs. For instance, established in 1924, the Windsor Art and Literary Club served as an outlet for Black mothers of the McDougall Street corridor to discuss their interests in the arts, literature, hobbies, and current events. The ladies of Hi, Lorraine, are you able to hear me? Sorry, I think I'm having.
I can.
Oh, you can.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
I can hear you now. Yeah, we
My
just
mic-
missed, I think, just the last sentence you were saying.
Oh, okay. Let me go back. Sorry, everyone.
That's okay.
Let me see. Established in 1924, the Windsor Art and Literary Club served as an outlet for Black mothers of the McDougall Street corridor. The ladies of the Windsor Art and Literary Club used their organization's platform to support local initiatives relating to education, social outreach, and civil rights, bringing attention to the various needs of Windsor's Black community. Serving as one of the oldest Black social clubs during its time, the club held annual luncheons, needlework events, musical performances, and festive teas for its members, as well as the public. The club routinely invited guest speakers for presentations and reading circles. For 60 years, the club contributed to the community through donations to local hospitals, the Red Cross, and other Windsor-based organizations. The Our Day Study Club is the longest running Black women's nonprofit organization in Canada. Composed of Underground Railroad descendants, the club was initially known as the Mothers Club of the McDougall Street corridor. Club members later changed the name to the Our Day Study Club to convey their dedication to spending at least 1 hour a day reading and focusing on self-improvement. The club encouraged education, literacy, and community involvement amongst the members and their children. These women advocated for accessible learning, encouraging Black children in Windsor's public schools to continue their education. In response to rampant discrimination, these women experienced and witnessed within their community, The club members organized social events, inviting prominent guests such as civil rights activist Mary McLeod Bethune and Shirley Chisholm. The Armstead Athletic Club gained inspiration from a local group of women with an interest in pursuing athletic and leisure activities. By 1940, notable residents such as Dr. Roy Perry, Belma Vincent, and J. Lyle Browning came together to establish the Armstead Athletic Club in 1940. The club, like so many other Windsor Black organizations, battled racial discrimination in their work to procure spaces for residents of color to participate in equal measure. After being barred from playing tennis in Jackson Park, club members established a number of tennis courts throughout the corridor for Black residents to use. The Pivots International Club, a 20th century social club for Black women, established its international branch in Windsor in 1963. The club's first chapter was created in New York City in the mid-1950s, later branching out to cities like Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Columbus, Washington, D.C., Buffalo, and Detroit. The club was created as an outlet for Black women to participate in female empowerment, community building, education, and social outreach. The club also facilitated an annual scholarship program providing bursaries for Black students in post-secondary education. The ladies of the Pivots Club regularly organized lavish brunches, luncheons, galas, dances, and fundraisers. Club conventions were held across North America, with members traveling annually to meet one another. In 1966, the Windsor chapter held its first International Pivots Club convention at Prince Edward Hotel, with an evening ball held at the Cleary Auditorium. Over 300 members and visitors attended the event from across North America, and this was the first Black social club convention to ever be held in Windsor. Every club, organization, and church in the McDougall Street corridor battled racial discrimination and segregation within the city. These institutions work together to address the varied needs of the community and combat unfair treatment. However, there were two specific organizations that were successful in influencing local and political civil and human rights legislation. The first, established in 1929, was the Colored Citizens Association, later called the Central Citizens Association. The CCA was organized by a number of prominent Black residents for the purposes of tackling housing and employment discrimination, as well as desegregating stores, restaurants, and public spaces like beaches and theaters. The CCA was instrumental in changing local policies and influencing businesses and industries to hire more Black workers. Numerous members of the corridor obtained jobs in previously segregated fields with the help of the CCA. In the 1960s, the Guardian Club continued the work of the CCA. The Guardian Club's membership included many residents of the corridor, as well as civil rights activists like Dr. and Mrs. Howard McCurdy. Howard McCurdy was a biologist at the University of Windsor and later became a member of the House of Commons. Also included Dr. Wilson Head, who was a sociologist and director of the Research and Planning Department for the Social Planning Council of Toronto. Dr. Daniel Hill, sociologist, historian, writer, and later the Human Rights Commissioner of Ontario, as well as Alan Boroboy, lawyer, who was a lawyer and the director of the Ontario Labour Committee for Human Rights. The Guardian Club facilitated a nationwide Black coalition, organizing local Black clubs under the National Black Coalition of Canada. Together, these clubs advocated for housing equality, fair employment practices, and the desegregation of every facet of Canadian society. So considering everything that has been discussed thus far, it's clear that Windsor's McDougall Street corridor was a vibrant and thriving community. However, this community was forever altered when the city of Windsor decided to participate in a federal program to redevelop urban areas in the 1950s. The McDougall Street corridor fell victim to urban renewal planning in the 1950s, an increasingly common practice in post-war North America. Governments, both federal and provincial, attempted to remove or raze areas that were deemed blighted or run down, often resulting in the uprooting of culturally significant working-class communities in the process. The Canadian government was especially concerned with overcrowding in urban centers as a result of anticipated population growth after the Second World War. This concern was exacerbated by Canada's housing crisis and the advanced age of most of the country's urban housing stock. Under the National Housing Act, the Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation would assess municipal plans for redevelopment, and if they were approved, cities could receive up to 75% of their renewal funding from the federal and provincial governments beginning in the early 1950s. These plans were often sold to the public as projects to improve health and safety conditions and to provide better opportunities. But really, many of these projects were established without the consent or responsible consultation of the affected communities, and as a result, residents were pushed out of their homes. Many lost businesses, and in some cases, some families were actually removed forcefully. Windsor's urban redevelopment project began in 1959 with the demolition of numerous blocks throughout the McDougall Street corridor, specifically the area bound by Riverside Drive, Windsor Street, Windsor Street, and Glengarry Avenue. Many of these properties were expropriated by the City of Windsor in an effort to modernize the downtown core. The plan called for the downtown core to be divided into 3 redevelopment locations. Areas 1, 2, and 3, which would include residential, commercial, and municipal buildings. This resulted in the expansion of City Hall, the creation of numerous parking lots and garages, as well as private development, public housing, and apartment buildings. Areas 1 and 2 were bound roughly by the McDougall Street corridor, and within the redevelopment area, approximately 34% of the residential population was Black. So that was approximately 40 families. So not every family in the McDougall Street corridor experienced expropriation, but many remaining residents certainly experienced the aftermath of this project and the slow decline of the area. The impact on the McDougall Street corridor was devastating, to say the least. The historic BME Church and the Walker House Hotel were expropriated and demolished in 1961. Both properties were used as parking lots by City Hall. The BME location is now a City Hall building, an extension of the building, and the Walker House Hotel property is an underground parking lot. The AME Church was expropriated and demolished in 1962, with the land used for public housing. The Frontier Social Club was redeveloped in 1963 for the purposes of public housing as well. The Black Masons lost their property to an apartment developer. The Mercer Street School property is now home to an apartment complex, and the J.C. Patterson property is now a parking lot for Food Basics. Hundreds of homes were demolished as well, pushing many families out of the area. The public housing and apartments that replaced these multi-generational homes rarely accommodated the large extended families that were commonplace within the corridor. And as a result, many chose to leave the area for newly desegregated neighborhoods in other parts of the city. Documents from the City of Windsor's Urban Renewal Department attest to this. They collected surveys that demonstrated that most of the families in the redevelopment area had more than 2 children, and many were still on the waiting list for housing by the early 1960s. It's also important to note the immense loss of wealth experienced by the community as a result of this project. Homes that had been built and passed down over a century were demolished, with residents being forced to give up their main financial asset. for what was deemed as a fair market price value by the city's appraisers. Of course, these homes were argued to be in rough shape. This was a requirement in order for the city to receive funding for renewal projects. They had to prove to the federal government that the homes were beyond repair. And so many of these homes were not going to sell for a lot of money on the open market anyways. So people didn't receive a lot in compensation. It would have been very difficult for many families to use this compensation to purchase homes in other areas of the city during this time. When surveyed, over 80% of the participants from the area stated that they were content with their living conditions. This is significant because it tells us that public opinion for this project was quite different from the various scathing reports from the city regarding living conditions and health and safety concerns. As well, the federal government had a number of alternative initiatives, such as a loan program for homeowners, which would have addressed homes that needed updating, while still allowing some residents to remain in their homes. However, this was not the route the city of Windsor chose. Instead, they decided the entire area needed to be repurposed. And this video here is quite interesting from the National Film Board of Canada. It was made in the 1960s. And it follows the redevelopment process in 4 cities across Canada. And this video here is the video that was made for the McDougall Street corridor here in Windsor. And this video is very clearly a propaganda film, mainly because it only shows the worst housing in the area. There were a lot of homes in the area that didn't need to be demolished, even though they were. There were also many businesses and churches that were demolished that were in good condition. And so this film sort of shows you how the city was demonstrating to the government what the McDougall Street corridor looked like. So studying post-war urban redevelopment is relevant today for a variety of reasons, one of them being the continued impact of redevelopment planning in Black communities across North America. And this is quite obvious when you look at certain places like Toronto and Little Jamaica and the gentrification that's happening because of the expansion of the subway line. By remapping the McDougall Street corridor, we can demonstrate to Canadians that the Black experience in Canada was not static. Black lives continued after the arrival of freedom seekers with the creation of communities, towns, businesses, schools, social clubs, churches, and recreational centers. Windsor's Black community has continued to keep the memory of the McDougall Street corridor alive through stories, monuments, and celebrations to reinforce the presence of Black Canadians in southwestern Ontario, their accomplishments, and the enduring legacy of their ancestors. So thank you very much. Sorry for the audio issues, and if you have any questions, I guess I'll take those now.
Thank you so much, Willow. No need to apologize about the audio. You did a fantastic job. Thank you so much. So while people are thinking of questions, I had a few questions myself. The first one was more of just a comment. I just wanted to point out that someone very special is in the audience today, Lois, who is whose father was Ronnie, who Smith, who operated the Walker House. So we're so grateful for her being here and also for the work of her father and her grandfather and as well. So
definitely, yeah. Lois was the first person I interviewed actually for the project. So hi, Lois.
And that actually leads me to a question as well. You'd mentioned Lois was the first person to reach out. I was just wondering if you could talk about the response to the We Were Here project. Did you get a lot of people volunteering to interview? Are you still looking for people to do interviews? How can our audience help?
Yeah, I would still love to speak to anyone who maybe grew up in the area or had family members who were in the area, or even if you just passed by and were familiar with people or have memories. That would be super helpful. I think a lot of times people think that their memories are not going to be helpful, but really anything you can remember about certain people or schools or businesses or social clubs, all of those things are really important. So Yeah, I think I gave, or I can provide my email in the chat if anyone wants to reach out to me. Regarding people, the response from the community, I would say a lot of people have been incredibly helpful, trying to send me images or sending me messages, like little tidbits of information that they can remember. But I will say that this is still very much a topic that is difficult for some people in the community to talk about because they did feel so heavily affected by what happened with their homes being expropriated and the community that they loved sort of being torn apart a bit. And so I would say people have been really, have really wanted to rally around the work that I'm doing, but you can still tell that people are upset and are frustrated by the way that the community was treated in the 1960s.
I've also shared your email from the post and
Okay.
also the Facebook group if people want to join to learn more, and also your Instagram page that you operate as well, where you've been sharing some fantastic photographs and really great information. So thank you for doing that as well. You're very busy.
Yeah, not a problem.
I also wanted to ask, so recently you had a photo sharing event and information sharing event. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and also the response to that as well too.
Yeah, so I put out a call to members of the community to see if anyone would be willing to share any family photos or any photos that they have of the community. And I had a lot of people reach out to me, especially on Facebook, just sending me images that they had in their own family collections, people scanning images. And it's amazing. I think a lot of people don't realize the treasure that they have in their own family photo albums, because there were a lot of photos, especially of the churches, that we couldn't find in other archival sources, but a lot of people had images of the churches, which was amazing. So yeah, it's just been a great response all around.
Great. And I had one other question as well is recently the project received. I was just wondering if you could talk about that and just describe what the funding will be used for to promote the project.
Sure, yeah. So the project initially started as a $10,000 grant from the University of Windsor. So it was between the history department, the anti-Black racism leadership grant is what the name was called, I believe. And also it was in partnership with Leddy Library and the Essex County Black Historical Research Society. And then we were approached for a much larger grant for $235,000. That was in partnership with the Law Center, Center for Cities at the University of Windsor, and also Parallel 42. And so a lot of the funding is going towards creating a website and an app, and the app will be used for a virtual walking tour. So you can sort of look at the map of the McDougall Street corridor and see all of the important locations. And you can also do the walk yourself in the area. And so the app is going to allow you to sort of learn a bit about each stop as you're going through the community. And so that's sort of what we've been working on right now, is just preparing the website and the app for the walking tour.
Excellent. So I'm just going to check to see if anyone has written any questions in the comments section.
Sure.
So there don't appear to be any more questions, but again, I have put the Facebook group and your Instagram page for people to follow and learn more. And I've also provided your email here as well too. And this is recorded, so we'll be sharing this on our social media pages as well too, so as many people as possible can see it. So thank you so much again, Willow, for all the work you're doing. It's really, truly amazing what you're doing with this project. And I think it's so important that more people learn about this history. So thank you again. And if you had any further comments, you're welcome to share. Otherwise, we'll leave it at that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Lorene.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us.